Hey guys, back again. Hopefully with a shorter one this time. But there's a topic I kind of just wanted to touch on, and I'll probably do a longer series on this one. Um, but it's this idea of subtlety in your lead, and you're probably going to hear me say at different points, really the core of this idea, which is that good leading to the outside observer is it's almost invisible, actually. And the reason for that is because where you're getting your control, where your power is sort of being exerted from, and not even necessarily power but control, your sense of direction in the dance is very internal. It's, if you're doing it right, if you're doing it well, it's much more internal than external, to the point where you're going to, and I don't expect anyone to have this out the gate, that's not my point, I just want to get you to understand the idea, but it's going to get to the point where you're controlling your partner almost without moving. And what I mean by that is that you're controlling her weight, her center of mass, effectively, which is how you lead. And you have to direct that. You have to feel where she is. You have to figure that out. But then as soon as you have that, your whole job is manipulating it, basically, and getting her to go where you want her to go on the time you want her to do it, and when and where and all that. But your control over it is very internal. I had an instructor tell me once, he was being a follower for me, so I'm already leading a guy that's, he wasn't quite as tall as me, but he's, at least as thick, he's much larger than most followers I was going to have. And yet he told me, after I finished doing the move we were supposed to be working on, he goes, you can do that much smaller. You can actually do that way more subtly. And I understood what he meant, but I was kind of shocked, because I'm thinking, okay, he's a technically a heavier follower. He's someone I have to exert a little more energy to move around. But when we did it again, I tried what he said, and it turns out he was exactly right. Because what I ended up doing to compensate, to kind of follow what he was getting at, was I started to try to move. I tried to exert more control inside, almost as if I'm moving my core a little bit, not turning. I'm almost turning less. I'm doing less to create more. And I'll get it. Like I said, I'll probably do a whole series about that, because I know that's going to be confusing. But I'm just putting an idea out there, because what happened is that more efficient control actually transferred way better through to his body, which actually moved him more effectively than the first time around, where I was actually physically doing more. At least it was a bigger move, and yet it didn't move him as well, and certainly not in as controlled of a way as the second time. And what that really had got me thinking about after that was to start noticing more of the subtleties in what I would do, and then what other leads that I noticed that do a really good job or doing. You can't really see it if you're watching as an observer, as an outside third party, just watching a different couple dance, and the leader is clearly doing it well. Jesus, camera. He's doing 80% of the work internally. He's focusing his energy on controlling his own internal rotation and internal focus, and compressing in the correct areas rather than everywhere. And what that does is that it actually creates the real feeling for the follower. I mentioned before that the follower the entire time is really just focused on how she feels physically, like how is this making her feel, both emotionally and physically. She's feeling something. She's feeling the energy transfer, but that does not require this big, oh, I gotta just flail my arms around and get her to go. That's not a thing. She's actually feeling it way more from your center. She's feeling it from everything kind of comes outward from your spine in lots of ways. I'm not a dance instructor. Don't take everything I say perfectly literally, but from what I've had to learn, your energy is focused almost outward from your ability to control the different sections of your body, and a lot of that has to do with understanding where your spine is in space. Oh, that's very technical. I'm going to get into those kinds of things in other videos, at least touch on them, because I know they can be very helpful once you kind of grasp it, but it's incredibly foreign for guys that are not that far along in this stuff, so don't worry about that too much. But the point I'm trying to make is that one thing that will really, really help you along the way is to understand that bigger is not necessarily better. As a matter of fact, it can often work against you. It makes you way more prone to doing things a little too drastically and potentially hurting somebody. Or at the very least, it makes you really inefficient, which can put you behind the beat or behind the song. Your timing can get thrown off very quickly because you move way too big, way too much. That'll be one of the other things I cover. It's a real basic concept, but it's something everybody gets wrong. Take small steps, guys. It'll work out for you, I promise. But this is kind of the same deal, except rather than focusing on your steps, you're focusing on your own internal muscle contractions and everything else. You need to be far more focused on control rather than power, because your power will get multiplied if you have better control. You don't have to exert as much energy because you're actually hitting the key points. You're tightening where it needs to be and allowing the rest to kind of flow around that. Again, I know that's vague. That's not super helpful. The whole point I want you to focus on, the real takeaway I want you to get from this, is that good leading, and I guess this probably applies to more than just dancing, but certainly to dancing, good leading it's in the subtleties. It's subtle. It's honestly pretty invisible. Okay, if you're doing the right things, because what that's going to do is it's going to create a flow that naturally causes you and your partner to do the right things when they need to be done. And you almost won't have to think about it as much because the energy flow, the connection between you two is so much more in sync. It's more efficient. It's more effortless, because the little bit of effort you needed to exert, you exerted in the right ways. You don't have to overcompensate with these gigantic moves and these gigantic flailing motions. You don't need to do any of that. You need to think, where is she? Where is her weight? Where is she physically in space relative to me? What tools do I have in this moment to control where she goes? Do I even know where she is right now in order to figure out where she's got to go next? These are all hugely important questions, and they're things that people forget to do all the time. I can get carried away plenty of times. I forget to do them, but I notice if I mess up or if things get off, that's typically what happened. It's a matter of understanding where the weight is and controlling it, but controlling it subtly. And she'll appreciate it too. She'll feel that it'll feel a lot smoother. You'll look a lot more skilled. Frankly, you'll feel more skilled because you will feel more in control. It's much more, okay, people make jokes all the time, like a guy driving a big old, ridiculous monster truck, practically he's probably compensating for something. It's kind of the same idea. If you're having to make these big extra motions, unless you're just doing it for style points, you know what I mean? That's a different subject. But you won't even be able to do that unless you've already got a good level of control. If you're doing these big motions to sort of compensate, so you feel like maybe you're doing something, you're probably on the wrong path. You're probably coming at this from the wrong direction. And it's honestly not that complicated. It's just a really easy thing to get wrong because it's not necessarily intuitive. It makes sense. Oh, I want to, I want to move her faster. I want to move her further. I want to do these things. I need to move accordingly. You do, but what that means is probably not what you think it means. You need to have more internal control because you're the leader. Everything you do is to initiate, not just the dance itself, but like I said before, every move, every step that's being taken is with that purpose in mind. So you need to understand that if there's ever going to be any control exerted in this dance, it needs to start with you. It needs to come internally from you because that's where every movement you have starts. It starts with your internal muscle contractions and everything else. Start there and just test yourself. See how well you can get through, how well you can get your follower to do what you wanted her to do, and just try it with a simple move, something that doesn't take a lot of thought, really. See how little you can give, just physical energy, how little you can give, how subtle you can be, and still get her to feel it and react accordingly. Because you can go too far, you can do too little, and that's not good either. But typically all that means is that you just need a better connection. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need a lot of energy and a lot of force. That's usually the opposite of what you need. Try it out. Or don't, but stick with me because, again, I'm going to explain much more of this in depth. But it's a good concept. It's a good early concept that I want you guys to have because it did take me a little while to understand it. Some of it I sort of just picked up intuitively, just physically. You start to feel the difference once you get good enough at stuff. You start to, once it becomes second nature, you start to almost naturally try to get a little more efficient at it without even really thinking about it. But it wasn't until that moment where the instructor kind of pointed it out to me on a move that I kind of already thought I was being pretty subtle with. I thought I was being I wasn't being too forceful, I didn't think. But apparently, from his perspective as the follower, maybe I wasn't being too forceful, but I could have certainly done it with a lot less and gotten as much, if not more, of a result. And so I didn't realize that as a leader. So he was giving me that other perspective, and that's a really good insight because that means that that's something you can always kind of keep in mind and stay on your toes about it because it'll help everyone. It'll help you be more efficient. It'll help you stay on time. You do have to do smaller moves to keep up with the song pretty often. But beyond that, it gives you more control. It gives you more say. It makes you more efficient. These are all really important things, really good things, and you're going to find that it makes learning new moves a lot easier if you're already pretty well versed in being efficient. And I like to, with that idea, I like to say that it's because good leading is effectively invisible, and it is. It is. If you're being subtle, it's pretty invisible from outsider's perspective. They say, I have no idea how he just got her to do that. But she did, and she didn't just make it up. She felt it from him. That's a big thing. It feels real good. It feels good for her. It'll feel real good for you once you realize that you were doing that and that that's why that happened. So keep that in mind. Make it a goal. But just have that mindset, guys. I just want to bring that up so it's in your head. You're going to be thinking about it because I'm going to do more videos on it later. But that's all. Awesome. Thanks.